Well, the World Affairs Council is usually pretty punctual, so we're going to get started. Welcome, good evening, and what a great opportunity to welcome you on such a beautiful day. My wife said, well, no one's going to come to the event tonight because they're all going to be outside. Well, you proved her wrong, and many other people wrong. It's great to have you here for this very special program, a homecoming welcome to Ambassador Brink. So we're very, very delighted. I'm Gleaves Whitney, the Executive Director of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation, and we are very proud and happy to be co-hosts of this wonderful program this evening with the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan. Let's give a hand to that partnership. Just very briefly, I want to say, I hope you'll come down to the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum and take a look at the excellent exhibits that set the stage for programs like this. One of the first things President Ford did when he got into the Oval Office was go to Central and Eastern Europe and learn about the geography, the history, the clashes. This is during the Cold War, 1975, and it shows that this area is of perpetual concern for the United States and our citizens need to be more aware of that area. So come on down to the Ford and learn about it before events such as this, if you can. Okay, yeah, absolutely, thank you. So it's my pleasure to introduce our partner, the head of the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan. There he is, Michael Van Denen. Michael, you've been a great partner in this. This is the third of our 8 every Tuesday night this year. Let's keep it up, partner.
All right, you too, Gleaves.
You take care.
Thank Gleaves and the museum. The Gerald R. Ford Foundation and Museum have been great partners, and we are so happy to be partnering with them. So we have been wandering all out throughout this area for a great decision series this year. But the next 5 weeks, we will be at the Ford Museum on Tuesdays at 6 o'clock. So we hope to see you for the rest of the series. And this series is sponsored by the Foreign Policy Association in New York. They have been doing this series since 1955, and we have been a part of it for all of that time. And the purpose of it is to present global issues that every American city should be learning more about and talking about. And we are just grateful that you care enough about the world and America's place in it that you're here tonight. I am Michael Van Denen. I'm the director of the World Affairs Council, and with my colleagues Erica Kubik and Rachel Brooks and Abigail Stead and the board of directors of the council, thank you for being here tonight. We're pleased to host this great decision series, and a huge thank you to East Grand Rapids High School for being willing to host their distinguished alumna, Bridget Brink. Let's thank them for making this possible tonight. We're also grateful to the Grand Rapids Community College video team for their expertise in filming this. We hope to be able to produce this broadcast on our YouTube channel, so keep an eye out at worldmichigan.org when this program will be available so that you can share it with others. It's our mission as a council to empower the people and organizations of West Michigan to engage thoughtfully with the world. We do this with the help of many of you, and we believe that to change the world, we first have to know the world. And you can learn more about what we do at worldmichigan.org. Our appreciation to WGVU Public Media for being our media sponsor and the Community Media Center for being our communication partner. And finally, to Ingrid Nelson of Ingrid Nelson Group at Greenridge Realty for being a special partner for tonight, a former council member and a classmate of Ambassador Brink right here at East Grand Rapids High. So I'm going to invite her to come up and introduce our special guest for tonight. Let's welcome Ingrid to the stage.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for all who are in attendance. It is my joy and honor to introduce to you a classmate of mine from the EGR class of 1987, Bridget Brink. Bridget has dedicated her life to defending freedom and democracy in Europe after the fall of the Iron Curtain of communism as a U.S. Foreign Service officer for almost 3 decades. She served 5 presidents, became an ambassador twice, and retired as a career minister, a 3-star general equivalent. Bridget served multiple tours overseas and at home to advance the long-standing bipartisan goal of a Europe whole, free, and at peace. Building partnerships to address national security threats, Bridget helped end wars in the Balkans, advance reforms in Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, and resolve the so-called frozen conflicts. She served in President Obama's White House as director for the Aegean and South Caucasus on the National Security Council. Bridget was nominated and confirmed unanimously by the Senate to serve as ambassador to the Slovak Republic from 2019 to 2022 and to Ukraine from 2022 to 2025. She became the first woman to be ambassador in a war zone. Under the threat of nightly missiles and drones, Bridget led her team to enable Ukraine to take back half of the land seized by Russia, keep the energy grid alive, and keep the economy running. She oversaw the largest assistance to Europe since the Marshall Plan. Bridget received the Ryan C. Crocker Award for exceptional leadership and expeditionary diplomacy. Bridget served under 5 presidents of both parties, Democratic and Republican, during her distinguished career. Bridget earned a bachelor's degree from Kenyon College and 2 master's degrees from the London School of Economics. She is married to Nicholas Higgins, a Foreign Service officer with the U.S. Army Agency for International Development for 25 years, including wartime tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Israel. They currently live in Lansing, Michigan, and are the proud parents of 2 sons. Ambassador Brink will give a few opening remarks, and then Dr. Mark Schaub, Dean of the Brooks College for Interdisciplinary Studies at Grand Valley State University, will moderate a discussion with her. Please, let's extend a warm welcome to my classmate and EGR grad, Bridget Brink.
Testing. That work? Well, first of all, just thank you so much for being here this evening. It's so fun to be back in my alma mater. This auditorium was not here when I was in school, so I feel like many things, it gets bigger and better. So really happy to be back here. I want to say thank you to, first of all, Michael Van Dennen and the whole World Affairs Council of Western Michigan team for having me back. I was here about 1.5 years ago and was deeply honored to receive the Vandenberg Prize. And I appreciated that very much and glad to help bring foreign affairs home to Michigan, but also to Gleaves and the Ford Library and how proud I am as also in East Grand Rapids, having grown up here, to have a piece of history and a president who is also from the same city. And also to Ingrid, my classmate, thanks so much for that incredibly warm introduction. I hope I'll try to live up to it. And I have a few other friends and classmates, Tony and Gwen, here tonight. Thanks a lot for being here. It's been great to be grounded back in Michigan when I was overseas for so long, and now I'm super happy to be back in Michigan, living now with my family. So it's just my great honor to be with you. I really appreciate your interest in foreign affairs. I think it's an important thing we all should be interested in. I'm glad to talk more about Ukraine and why our foreign policy actually matters to us here at home. So maybe I'll turn it over to Mark, and happy to get into the discussion.
Well, thank you so much for coming back home to talk with us today. On behalf of all of us, Grand Rapidians, Michiganders, Americans, we are grateful to you for the career of service that you have done for our nation and the world. We really appreciate what you've done.
Thanks.
I guess, being back here in the building that launched your distinguished career, what are some of the waypoints, the people or experiences along the way that took you from Gaslight Village and Reed's Lake to these world capitals and these high-stakes meetings?
Well, this is a great question. I don't think there's just one thing, but I do think education really underpins a lot of what I was able to do, and what I think is so important we make sure all our kids and communities are able to do. I was lucky to have a great education that began here, and I ended up going to Kenyon College, and there, for reasons I'm not sure, I walked into the study abroad office and thought it'd be fun to study in London. And I went to study there, and that started me on a career that went into foreign affairs for 28 years and living all around the world. But it all started with education, with my family valuing education and the community here valuing education. And I think it takes really those things put together for students and young people to have opportunities and success. So yes, I spent a lot of maybe ill-spent time in Gaslight Village and other places, but it turned out okay. And I'm so happy that I see that this community and others are thriving, and they're thriving in part because the communities value public education. So I'm grateful to that.
Well, of course, we were hoping to hear a lot about and talk about Ukraine, but you also had a lot of very interesting, challenging posts and responsibilities. Could you talk a little bit about what are the big challenges that you've also had to deal with in your career before you ended up with the ambassadorship there in Kyiv?
Yeah, as Ingrid mentioned in the introduction, my career is basically centered around the countries that are on what we might call the frontier of freedom, the contested spaces in Eastern Europe or Southern Europe or Central Europe, where had lived under communism for a long time, but had broken free from that, had declared independence that the United States had supported, and that worked as a country to become democracies and stronger democracies. And so what that meant is I spent a lot of time supporting democratic foundations and ideals. And what does that mean exactly? In real terms, that means things like ensuring a free press, supporting independent institutions, supporting an independent judiciary and rule of law in particular, and also change of political power, peaceful, democratic change of political power. Those things are the foundations of a democracy, and I spent almost 20 years doing that. And the question you might ask is that all sounds great, but who cares? And the reason it matters for us is that my life was really in a broader strategic sense about creating relationships and coalitions to burden share our response to threats and issues around the world, number one. And if you think about things like, I don't know, a state like Iran or North Korea or other such threats, you want to have partners together to solve that. Or even a complicated issue like issues in the Middle East. You don't want to do it alone, because otherwise we take on all the burden. But it's not just to create those friends and partners that are around the world, but it's also to create markets for U.S. goods, because it's fantastic that we have a country of 350 million people, but ultimately for business and to keep expanding our prosperity, we want to have our goods be able to be sold in other countries as well. And then finally, it's a security partnership, and that's our foundational, most important security partnership is the one we have with European partners in NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That is the preeminent security partnership for the United States. And ultimately, for our success, for our own prosperity, we want partnerships like that in NATO. And so what I did as a person that was representing our country, but under 5 different presidents, was try to strengthen those partnerships by helping strengthen those democracies. And so it matters to us here at home, as we know, to have those strong partnerships for all those reasons.
Thank you. Are those, for the most part, those democracies stronger than they were 10, 20 years ago?
Well, so a couple of things I would say. First, in diplomacy, one thing you learn, it's never over. And I think in democracy, it's never over. So in all of those democracies, some are stronger, I would say some are weaker. But there was one, I would say, prevailing threat to those democracies, and that was largely Vladimir Putin's Russia. Because for Putin, his goal is not to have stable, strong, prosperous democracies on his borders, because that would prove that it's possible to have that in areas of the former Soviet Union. So what his goal is to have unstable, chaotic countries in an area that he can control. In order to, in the case of Ukraine, I know we'll get to that, but for example, control a country or countries, to divide Europe and to weaken America. So he has a much bigger goal than he does just in terms of creating chaos on his own border. But that has been and was the number one obstacle to these countries being stronger democracies and stronger partners to us. Because what Putin knows is that for us to have those partners, especially all over Europe and in a bigger Europe, is not good for Putin.
Thanks. So Ukraine. I've never been to Ukraine. Many of us have never been to Ukraine, but we're moved by what we've been seeing for years now, reading about, hearing the stories, grieving with Ukrainians and their losses and the ongoing struggle. You left your post less than a year ago. I don't know if you've been back or not, but could you just describe for us, like February of 2026, like your assessment of the situation, the ongoing war?
My assessment of the current situation is it's very tough. I mean, it is very tough for Ukraine, for Ukrainians, and I just want to shout out the Ukrainians that I met just before, who are here in the audience, and also who I met the last time I was back with the World Affairs Council. It's very tough, and it's tough for a number of reasons. It's tough because this is the coldest, harshest winter of the 4-year war. It's tough because Putin continues to send missiles and drones to try to destroy the energy grid, which means to put millions of people into the cold and dark with no power. And it's tough because the United States has changed its positioning in terms of how we address and approach this terrible, terrible war, the biggest threat to peace and security in Europe since World War II. And we have taken a position that is one of, I would say, independent mediator rather than what I believe, what I did while there, what I believe is the right thing to do, is take a position that there is a right and a wrong, there's an aggressor and a victim, and that the United States should always be on the right side of history, which means we should always be supporting freedom and independence of countries. So despite the fact that this is perhaps the toughest moment of the war, I do believe that the Ukrainians will, well, first of all, continue to fight, but in the end will prevail. And why do I believe that? Well, number one, I know Ukrainians, and they're going to fight to the end. And number two, it's an existential fight for Ukraine and Ukrainians. And the real question is, how many people are going to die? How many Ukrainians are going to die? The number is extraordinarily high. It need not be. And it's not just those who are giving their blood for their country, but it's also 20,000 children who've been abducted and taken to Russia. I can't, as a mom, I honestly can't imagine a more horrifying thought than that. It's the number of people who have been tortured and who are continuing to be held in Russia, including many civilians. I don't even know what the exact number is, but it's a very high number. It's the amount of destruction that has taken place. And when I left, it was such a high number that it's hard to see how we would even help to rebuild. So the losses are not just in the human losses, they're like across the board in so many ways. So this is going to be a very difficult and expensive recovery. And it's all because of Vladimir Putin and his starting of this war. And this is what I think we always have to keep in mind, especially now.
Okay, you mentioned his name, Vladimir Putin. Is there any change in the calculation, perhaps? I mean, we thought this was going to be easy. Yeah. Clearly wasn't. Like, what's going on with this guy?
I think he thinks he's winning. I think that's what he thinks. I don't think he's going to win in the long run. But I think right now he thinks he's winning. And the reason I think that is that we are not doing the things that we could do to make it much harder for him. So what we could do is we could use our leverage to try to demand a ceasefire before negotiations. This is one way the negotiations, and I think we might get into it, but really, you cannot have negotiations while one side continues to be under fire. There has to be a ceasefire because there's no ability for a negotiator to negotiate if every day of that negotiation, the negotiator continues to be under that pressure. So there needs to be a ceasefire in order to have negotiations, and there is no ceasefire. In fact, the opposite. Putin has increased his missiles and drones in this year, and 2025 has been the most dangerous, deadly for civilians since 2022 at the beginning of the war. It's also seen some of the very biggest attacks on Ukraine since the whole start of the war, certainly since I was there. Multiple massive attacks have been the biggest since that time. So he's actually escalated the war while negotiations are going on. So we're not demanding a ceasefire. That's one thing we should be doing, just to even have negotiations. And it's clear the Ukrainians will agree to one. It's clear that Putin is not agreeing to one. The other thing that we could do is turn up the pressure on Putin. There are many things that can be done without just expending a lot of U.S. taxpayer money. But for example, we could be putting more pressure, more sanctions that would help cut off the war funding machine. That's specifically on oil. We have done some, but we could do more. We could go after the shadow fleet. This is a fleet of tankers that's going around and selling Russian oil. We could go after that even more. We could press the Europeans to release the frozen sovereign assets. It's over $200 billion that are sitting in Europe, and then use those to buy weapons in America to help Ukraine defend itself. we could be putting all of the tools of our power against Putin to stop this. But we're not doing that. And so what I see right now in the situation is a Ukraine that continues to stand despite all of these challenges it faces, and some European partners which are trying to help. And us failing to do what I think we need to do, not just for Ukraine, but to stop Putin from taking all of Ukraine and then deciding that he wants to take Moldova, or maybe make a path to Kaliningrad, which would be through NATO countries, the Baltics, for example, with whom we have a sworn treaty guarantee. An attack on one is an attack against all, and potentially bringing to bear a question about our own daughters and sons being on the ground in Europe. And anyone who thinks that this is not realistic, I would just say my 28 years and my own view of playground politics is that if you've got a bully, you've got to stop that bully. And if you don't, the bully keeps going. And I think this is as simple as it is in Europe right now with Putin.
Thanks. So Putin thinks that he's winning. What about the perspective of the other protagonists, Volodymyr Zelensky? What's the outlook from that perspective in your mind?
I mean, how I see it, I'm not, of course, involved in it directly right now, but how I see it, it seems to me that President Zelensky is trying to figure out how to keep America supportive in the more limited ways that it's happening right now, while doing what I feel, or I assume he thinks he needs to do to preserve his country. What I know from Ukrainians is that this idea of giving up this Donbass, which is eastern Ukraine, in order to have some kind of peace agreement is really unthinkable, because the Russians haven't been able to capture it in 4 years of war. What we've seen from President Trump is pressure on Ukraine to come to a deal. But I think anybody who's lived in this area doesn't trust any deal that Putin might make, and certainly doesn't think that Putin's appetite is going to be limited only to some piece of territory, whether it's Donbass, whether it's more than that. And so I think he's trying to figure out how to keep America with him, while he also deals with a population that has suffered a lot over a long period of time.
Thanks. A few moments ago, you mentioned the incredible determination and perseverance of the Ukrainian people. We've witnessed this from afar, the determination and the resilience of the Ukrainians. Is there a way you could describe or comment on the character of Ukrainians and why that is, or what you've observed directly or from your conversations with other representatives of the Ukrainian government?
I mean, I would just say Ukrainians are very strong. They're very strong, and they're very innovative. And these are some of the things that I think we saw during the war. I'll give you an example of the way in which every Ukrainian in Ukraine is, and outside, but I can speak to in Ukraine, is working to fight to this existential fight for survival. Whether, the dad, the mom, the kids, everybody's doing something. One of the things that I really appreciated about Ukrainian culture, not all cultures are like this, but Ukrainian culture is very innovative. And so while they were fighting this war, one aspect of this war is that it's very technological. So drones make up a huge part of what's going on in terms of the war. As our military folks used to say, it's the battle lab of tomorrow's war is happening right now in Europe. So while in terms of the artillery and the way in which kind of older, more traditional weapons are being used, that looks a little bit like something from the last century. But the way in which drones are being used all across the front line, and this is like a 1,200 1,200-mile front line, is like the war and is the war of tomorrow. And the Ukrainians are leading on this effort. And when you have a drone war, that requires quick adaptation. So these drone companies are changing their features maybe daily, quickly, in order to adapt to the war environment. This is one area where, because we've taken a step back and because we're not deeply working so closely with the Ukrainians, we ourselves could use and would want to have this information about how this war is being fought. But a lot of it's being fought in this technological way, and the reason that the Ukrainians have been able to survive is that they have been able to make up a deficit of artillery, essentially with technology. And they have done things that are quite amazing and are going to be applicable in other circumstances. And it's something we should be more involved in order to also benefit from what they are learning.
Is anybody else benefiting from this knowledge and this
Yes.
adaptation? I mean, if we're not, who is?
Well, this is a great question, because on the other side, Russia is doing the same thing. And the countries that are working with the Russians include China, Iran, and North Korea. And that's who's benefiting on the other side. And I think for that reason alone, I would want us to be deeply involved in seeing Ukraine succeed. Because if Russia wins, that's a win also for those three countries. And that is a big loss for the United States.
Yikes.
Exactly.
So here in West Michigan, we have access to mostly mainstream media. What are we missing out on, in your estimation, by consuming just mainstream media about the Ukraine invasion and ongoing war?
One thing I would say that it's easy to miss out on, because it's being done on many levels, is that I think Putin's playing three-dimensional chess and we're playing checkers. So of course this disruption and this war, the biggest threat to peace and security in Europe since World War II, is being played out in Ukraine. It's also being played out in some other territorial pieces that are in Putin's region, you know, whether it's Georgia, whether it's the so-called frozen conflicts, whether it's pressure on Moldova or some other countries as well. But it's not just a territorial war that's happening. What I've seen over decades is that Putin is hell-bent to undermine the West. So in addition to what he's doing, you know, most visibly in Ukraine, there's been a disinformation war that has been working its way around Europe and in America to try to make people divided and distrust government. Because in Russia, people distrust government because government lies, and so people don't trust it. But that this disinformation effort, this so-called hybrid warfare that's been happening, has actually been quite successful. So that's another plane of the war that Putin is conducting. Another way in which Putin is trying to divide Europe, undermine the United States, but basically undermine the West, is to intervene in our own elections, or elections in Europe, or elections in the United States. Another way in which he's doing this is to conduct targeted assassinations in countries outside of Russia. And then there's what he's doing internally to his own opposition. And I think to understand and think about how we should respond to that, it's really important to understand that this is a strategy that's very dangerous to our future and very dangerous to Europe's future. And why should we really care? Because it seems Russia's so far away. It's got an important history. Why should we care? Well, Europe is going back to what I said at the beginning, it's our biggest trading partner. Our biggest economic partner is the European Union. $1.6 trillion of trade goes between us and the EU. 16 million jobs on both sides of the Atlantic depend on that trade. So economically, this is such an important part of our prosperity. But then again, security, NATO, the home of Europe. In a security sense, that's also incredibly important to us. And then having alliances that we can work together on any broad range of issues. And whether or not it's these rogue states, Iran, North Korea, or climate change, or Middle East, or other issues in the world, we want these allies, we want these partners. And what Putin's goal is to disrupt and destroy. And we just have to understand that that's the overall goal. And we need a strategy that's going to counter that, and that's going to counter this three-dimensional chess that he's playing in every way.
Thanks. So, are there any unsung heroes we're missing out on? And outside of the heroic and resilient Ukrainians themselves, other countries that we might not know that have been heroic in helping Ukraine, or even Americans, political leaders or groups in the U.S., who are the unsung heroes that we may not know about?
Well, first and foremost, I would say Americans. And so I live in Lansing now, and I'm always surprised and just heartened to hear a lot of questions about Ukraine and concerns about what's happening. A lot of, interestingly, Ukrainian flags all over Michigan, and not just Michigan, in California on the East Coast. And I think Americans understand what's going on. I think Americans understand what it means to have a threat to freedom, and they care deeply about it. And so I think one of the heroes who are also providing a lot of support, probably many of you, even in this room, are the American people, themselves, ourselves. And I think that is very heartening to me, because I think we understand that freedom is not free. Our own freedom wasn't free. And for other countries to lose their freedom is also a threat to us. So that's the first, I'd say. Other countries, Poland and the Baltic states, wow. Also pretty strong and pretty amazing. Poland has stepped up incredibly. It's putting a lot of money toward its own defense. The Baltic states, small but mighty, quite remarkable. But the reason why is they know that they're next. And so they're worried. And that's why they're putting so much effort and energy into this. Other countries like Britain and some of the other countries of Europe have really done a lot without a lot of actual money, but have provided a lot of things that have helped the Ukrainians stay free. And frankly, we've provided a lot. We've provided $100 billion US taxpayer dollars. And what frustrates me now is that we're not taking advantage of that huge investment we made in Ukraine. And in fact, we've squandered it. And I think that's a big mistake for us. Because as a person who just so proudly served our country over 28 years, I was always proud to be an American diplomat. A lot of us like to say that there's nothing that makes us prouder than to, sit behind the desk with, it's not our name, it's with the United States of America. And what I can say is that people do not feel the same way anymore. And to me, that is such a heartbreak, because I did not serve for any particular administration, but for the interests of our country. And that is exactly what I know all those in public service also tried to do. So I think we can get back to where we have been for such a long time, but I think it's going to take a lot of work.
I think this is my last question. There's a lot of folks here that'll ask interesting questions. You were a recipient of the World Affairs Council's Vandenberg Award a year and a half ago. One of the quotes by Michigan Senator Vandenberg was that NATO is one of the three pillars, the three institutions that was going to set the stage for the post-World War II peace. You mentioned NATO. You mentioned the attack on one NATO member being attack on the whole. You just specifically singled out some of the real helpers, the Polands, the Britons, and others that have stepped up. But with all of the recent meetings with NATO, the kerfuffle of Greenland with Denmark, NATO seems to be on the rocks in some ways. Could you comment on the prospects for NATO to continue as a viable shield for peace in Europe?
I might just turn that question to, I think the United States is on the rocks, because to me, I can't imagine I just can't imagine how we are in a position where we're talking about taking over another country that's a NATO ally. I never, in my worst nightmare, thought that that is where we would be as a country, ever. And it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. It's not just that it's morally wrong, which it is, but it's just wrong for our country. And we are becoming a pariah in the world, and it's a mistake. It's a grave mistake, because we need and want our allies and our friends. And approaching international affairs as if it's all about ownership and it's all about deal making and not rested in our values, which we share with all of those countries of NATO, we will be out of NATO. And I don't think that is in our national interest at all. And I think this is where we as a country have to decide what is it we're for. And what my view is, what has made us strong and prosperous is our foundation on our values: freedom, democracy, rule of law, creating alliances with like-minded countries, and working around the world, because we are a global interconnected world right now, to promote our values and our interests. We don't always get that calculation right. I wouldn't defend everything we've ever done internationally. In fact, I was vocally opposed to some of the things that we have done in the past, but that's our process. We're a democracy. But I never thought we would be rooted in something that I have only seen in autocratic and authoritarian countries, which is essentially might makes right, and that corruption at the highest levels is okay, and that we are going to base our foreign policy on simple deal making and ownership. That's just not right, and it's not good for our country.
A round of applause before we started audience questions, but you beat me to it. I'm Erica Kubik. I'm the Director of Programming, and I, along with Michael Van Denen, will be moderating Q&A. I've got some mics to pass around. It is a little, oh good, we're bringing up the lights in the audience. So just raise your hands and someone will get them out to you. You can also text me. And in fact, I've already gotten a text question that I'll use to start us off, but you can text me at 616-308-6560, and as always, our house rules are to ask respectful and succinct questions. But I think this question that was asked by an audience member really gets to Dr. Schaub's final point and the question of partnerships, and you responded eloquently, but our audience member is asking, can we rebuild these relationships in the future, or will countries decide to go the easier path they now live in?
That's the $64 million question. I think we must, and I'm going to dedicate every ounce of my effort to do so, and I hope that our country and other Americans will do the same. I think it's going to be very hard, and my guess is it's going to take decades. But I think we have no choice. We have to stand up and be who we are and do the right thing. And if we don't, I think it's a cold and lonely place in America.
Good evening. I wonder if you could shed some light on the motivations of Putin. During the Cold War, it was obviously a free economy versus communism. That's no longer an issue. I mean, we really, if you think about it in terms of religions and beliefs and values and stuff for amongst basic people, that we really have more in common than different. So what motivates Putin? What does he want to get? Why destabilize the West? What's the point? And the second part of my question, if you could remind us, please, what was the agreement that the West made with the Ukraine in exchange for Ukraine surrendering the nuclear weapons that it was left with after the fall of the Soviet Union?
What was the agreement? Sorry, I didn't catch that last part.
I think that they were offered some security.
Yes, the Budapest Memorandum.
Yeah, if you could expand on that, please.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with the second question first. So it was the Budapest Memorandum, and it was us and the UK and Russia, and we have not upheld the guarantee that we had. It was a piece of paper, and it is partly why the Ukrainians are very distrustful of any kind of agreement that doesn't come with concrete security assurances. And then on your first question, I won't presume to be able to get into the head of Putin, but I do think what he wants is to maintain power. I think it's as simple as that. And to do so, he's a disruptor. And he's been able to maintain his power internally in his country, in part by having forever wars all over the world with everybody else, and by using it in ways that are, getting rid of perceived opponents, controlling all parts and apparatus of the government, and co-opting people where he needs to. And so I think it's about power and continuing that power, and the money and the other things that come with it.
In the earlier part of your talk, you used the language of coalition as a basis for, problem solving with this crisis. And then later you appealed to building alliances as part of the solution. And I wondered if you could respond to what I perceive as a difference between coalitions and alliances, in the suggestion that alliances presuppose a willingness to back up allies in possibly illegal wars of aggression, whereas coalitions suggest a much more open, pragmatic perspective on problem solving.
I think we should use the tool that is most useful for the problem that we have. In this case, I think we need to use coalitions and alliances. So alliances normally just refers to, for example, the NATO alliance, a treaty alliance that we have with a country. Our NATO allies are also, including Poland and the Baltic states, maybe first and foremost, that are just on the border of this war with, that Russia's war with Ukraine, are definitely very concerned about what's happening and doing what they can to stop it. We should be working with those allies. With regard to coalitions, pretty much any democratic government around the world, including in places like Australia and other places, also see the value in supporting other democracies. And so I think we need to work with both alliances and coalition partners. But my view is that the U.S. should be the leader and is the leader of the free world. I hate to say was. I hope that's not true. But I'm not sure we think that, or even anyone in the world thinks that at this point. And if we're not the leader, what I see in international affairs is that our strategic competitor, China, and others jump in. And do we want a world and norms that are set by China or another country that's a potential adversary or very strong competitor with us? I certainly don't. So we need to lead. That doesn't mean we have to control everything, and that's why we have these alliances and partnerships and coalitions, so that we're not alone in that leadership. We're doing it together with other either like-minded nations or allied partnerships.
Hello. Thank you for coming. I know that a lot of Russians have also suffered terribly from this war. Are you able to expand on some of the suffering that Russians, who obviously Putin doesn't care what they've gone through, but some of the losses that the Russian people have suffered because of this war?
I don't know it from direct experience, but I do know that the Russians are losing thousands of people, thousands of casualties, that's dead and wounded, a day. And the stories that I've heard about, they're pretty gruesome, about how many people are dying on the front lines and how Russia's well-known for how it mistreats its soldiers and how people are either being released from prison or coerced into going to the front lines and then forced to move up in advance and ultimately getting killed and forced at gunpoint. Again, I don't have firsthand knowledge of this, but there's plenty of, I'd say, data and evidence that's available even online to see that the Russian people, especially from certain parts of Russia, mostly the poorer parts of Russia, are paying a very, very high human cost to the war.
I have a text question about the, let me pull it up, about the Wagner mercenaries defecting. And our audience member would like to hear your opinion on what happened with that, and if it shows any evidence of rifts within Russian leadership or military.
I have read about a few cases of that happening. I don't know the extent of it. I don't see Russia stopping. What I can say, what experts on Russia like to say, is that Russia under Putin is going to remain strong until it's not, or remain intact until it's not. And it's hard to know when that tipping point will happen. But certainly ramping up the pressure on Putin and on Russia right now would help to reach that potential tipping point.
Ambassador, you've been following how the U.S. Congress has been supporting or not supporting Ukraine. It's a little bit confusing to figure out where the Senate and the House is on this. There have been impassioned defense of Ukraine, and then it seems not much. Do you have any sense from your time as ambassador and beyond what's happening? What's the mood in Congress on this to make anything happen?
Well, this might venture a little bit into the political, so I'm sorry, but I can say that I know a lot of the members of Congress because I worked with them while I was ambassador to Ukraine very closely, because of course we had a lot of U.S. taxpayer money going to Ukraine, and I was accountable to both the administration and the president, but also to members of Congress. So I worked with them in terms of answering questions and on oversight, on assistance, on what was happening, what was going on the ground. And what I believe is that in our Congress, there is a overwhelming majority of people who support continuing to support Ukraine. That's what I believe, based on my knowledge. I think that on the Republican side, people are being silent, are silent, or not acting not pushing forward ideas that ultimately would help to ramp up pressure on Putin. On the Democratic side, the Democrats are shut out of power in Washington right now, not in the House, not in the Senate, and of course not in the White House. And so Democrats don't have the power to change that situation. And so we're seeing some members, both Republican and Democrat, that are talking about support for Ukraine. But what we haven't seen, for example, is there's a sanctions package that's been in Congress that could be passed that would ratchet up this pressure on Putin. And I assume that what Congress, or at least the Republicans in Congress, are doing are waiting for a signal from our president in order to pass this. So there's more that could be done, and I think it would require Congress to decide that they're going to push it through. And until there's more balance of power in Washington, I don't foresee that happening.
Do you see Mark Carney in Canada stepping up to be the next world leader, someone who brings together alliances and takes the old moniker of Reagan when he said we were the shining city on the hill, but not any longer, Do you have faith that Carney can pull this out and become the leader that the United States once was?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I think he really hit a nerve, a positive nerve with his speech. I actually hope and want the United States to be the country we are and that we need to be. So my hope is that we will find a way back to our foundation, find a way back to what made us successful and prosperous and a leader as a country. And so I think we should never consider Canada our enemy. And as Michiganders, I mean, I don't understand at all for 1 second how we're having this trade war with Canada. It makes no sense. Economically, it makes no sense. Neighborly, we in Michigan know you don't just punch your neighbor in the face. Why? It makes no sense. So, but I hope it comes from us. I hope it comes from us, and I think it will. Because I don't think what's happening right now on foreign policy, but even more broadly in America, is reflective of who we are as a country. Whether it's on, are we going to abandon our friends and our allies? Are we going to be okay if corruption is happening right before our eyes by members of our elected officials? Are we going to stand by and watch what's happening in streets of America where security services are completely out of control and even killing American citizens? Pressure being put on universities, business, law firms, the free press? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. We can't, because this goes against every grain, I think, in what makes who we are. And I would also say that the other piece that I really oppose and think we need to fight is this lack of decency. We can disagree, yeah. I'm a mom, and my kids are 18 and 20, and I'm appalled by what I'm seeing out of our elected leadership because it's just wrong. I don't mind. We have strong disagreements at the dinner table. Great. They get heated sometimes. Okay, no problem. But we're going to be decent. We're going to be decent to each other. And I think somehow we've lost the value of that, and we're accepting that it's okay not to be decent. But we're from Michigan, and we are Michigan nice, but we're also Michigan tough. And so I think it really requires us as a country, and I think Michigan can lead to help us find our way back home and to the country that we are and we need to be for our kids and their kids and our future.
My question is this. We have all seen our president literally roll out the red carpet for Putin, and he admires strong men. And so I'm very concerned about these midterms, because we do need a balance of power in the government. And I fear that we are not going to have fair elections.
Yeah.
And just with some of the things that are coming, some bills that are coming up in Washington, and troops coming into the cities and maybe getting people fearful to come out and vote. So how either hopeful or really frightened are you that this could come to pass? Because you had also said that Putin, controls the voting there more or less, and I see that same a tactic that it seems that our president is taking now to try to make things less fair.
Mm-hmm.
And what can we do with it? I mean, as regular citizens, register people, do what we can, but I think there's a real fear of that for a lot of Americans.
Yeah, what I can say after 28 years working in these parts of Europe, these young democracies in broader Europe, is that I've seen the light of freedom go out. And I never thought in a million years that I would see signs of that here at home. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And we need to be aware of that and know what this means. So yes, I'm very concerned about what could happen with our elections. I'm very concerned about some of the ideas that I hear coming out of DC, nationalizing our elections, or efforts to obtain our voter rolls in Michigan and other states. We should all be really concerned. But what I believe is that what we need to do is fight for what we believe in and the values of our country, which is first and foremost a free and fair election. It should never be a question. But I think there are going to be efforts. That would be my prediction based on what I see happening in every other sphere. So what can we do in response? We can be loud. That's one thing. I think it's really important that Americans are loud about what's happening. Peaceful, but loud. Number two, we need to be politically active. So we need to, in my view, turn the House to the Democrats, and then Democrats then need to deliver. And we need to potentially turn the Senate, and then, of course, deliver. But we need a balance of power in Washington, and that's going to require making sure that we're very active in the lead up to the elections, and then also making sure that when the elections come, that people are participating. And that means in the primaries. That means early. That means being really a part of the process. And then the third thing is that I think we need to make sure our county clerks and people who are responsible for our elections at every level are strong and supported. They're going to have to do their job like they probably never have done it before. But I do believe, I trust our system. I trust that we have a decentralized system of elections with people who are not trying to rig the elections. But we're going to need that across the country. We're certainly going to need that in Michigan. So the question is that going to be enough? And when I was in Ukraine, we first went in, it was just 9 of us and me. The embassy hadn't been open. There hadn't been an ambassador there for 3 years. We were immediately facing challenges that I had no idea. The missiles and the drones and a press and media scrutiny I'd never even known as a diplomat, even having been ambassador before. Stories and horrible things that I only thought my grandparents in World War II would have had to grapple with, but that were happening. The kinds of torture and killing that was happening, including of children. Never imagined. And it was very hard to kind of handle all of this happening at once while leading a mission and working with Washington. But the way we were able to do it is that we felt like this mission must be done. There's just the Ukrainians. How are they so strong? Because it must be done. And I think this moment for us in America, this must be done. We need to make sure our country has free and fair elections, remains a country that's based on those values of freedom, democracy, and rule of law. And we got to make sure, right now, we have to do this now. And it's for this reason that I'm not a diplomat anymore, and that I have chosen a different path, because I feel like this is how I can help our country right now. This is the kind of service that I can provide. I wish it weren't so. But it is. That's the reality. So I really appreciate those questions and just encourage us to be strong and active.
I have a question about the Ukrainian political system, and we've been reading some things about what's happening in Ukrainian politics and some people resigning and the like, and I imagine that there's no electioneering going on in Ukraine right now because they're in a war zone, but can you explain a little bit about how the system works and what President Zelensky the powers he has and the political system inside the country, and what's the current status of that?
Well, I mean, it's a country under attack now for almost 4 years, so I don't know that I can say this is the way it works under peacetime conditions, but President Zelensky continues to be president. He has said that he's open to elections, but to have elections, you do need to have some kind of security. Because, of course, with missiles and drones coming in every night and every day, you don't want to have people gathered at a ballot box and then be bombed. And there's no security. And it goes back to there's no ceasefire. So I think to have elections, there needs to be some baseline of, well, a ceasefire, potentially ability for people on the front lines. There's probably 1 million soldiers on the front lines to be able to vote. The potential for people out of the country who have fled, millions of people fled the country to vote. Observers to try to ensure that there's confidence in the election. And then, an election administration. I think under the current circumstances, this is pretty difficult to do. But could it be done if there's a ceasefire? Yes, it absolutely could. And I think the Ukrainians would be willing to do it as well. But those conditions would have to be in place, and we'd want to work, and I would recommend working with international organizations that specialize in these things, in elections, like the OSCE.
For one last question. So let's think about the future and diplomacy. And our audience member is asking about the difference between career and appointed diplomats to negotiate with allies in various other countries. And how has the trend of maybe more appointed diplomats versus career diplomats affected recruitment of young folks hoping to join the Foreign Service?
Well, maybe just to say, though, in our system, which is actually quite unusual in countries like ours, I think we might be the only system that works this way in any country in Europe or in other allied countries around the world. Our system of diplomats is both political appointees who are coming from outside of the diplomatic ranks and who are appointed as ambassador, and career officials who, like what I was, who join and spend a career and work their way to become an ambassador. And usually the balance is something like 30 to maybe 32 or 33% political versus career. But recently, and especially under President Trump, that number of the political appointees has gone up exponentially. And why does it matter? What I would say, I'm also a member of both my union and even as a retired ambassador, but also of the American Academy of Diplomacy that promotes professionalism in our ranks and in what we do. We see it as a profession and not as something you can, just as I wouldn't probably jump into some other thing without some background or experience or ability to also do it. The diplomacy is considered a profession among those of us who practice it. So with the political appointees, there's a certain advantage. In some cases, in many cases, they can be close to the president. So they can, in that way, have a relationship with the president that maybe a career person might not have. But the career folks have an advantage in that they understand the tools of power and how to use them to achieve our interests in a way that sometimes a political appointee wouldn't have. But the way our system works as it is, it's divided in this way. And I can say you can have fantastic political appointees, you can have fantastic career appointees, but this is how it operates now. Does it decrease the interest of young people? I don't think so. But I do think that the important thing above all is that the people that are put into those jobs have the experience and qualifications to be able to do them effectively. And I'd say for the most part, we have been able to do that. I work a lot with political ambassadors, and often they have been distinguished people in business, or in some cases, they have also been political ambassadors in the past. I think where we have problems is when it's on the political side or even on the career side, someone doesn't have the experience and the ability to achieve our goals, to actually advance our values and our interests.
Thank you so much. Let's give Ambassador Brink one more round of applause. Thanks also to Dr. Mark Schaub for getting us started on the questions. If you enjoyed the program or other programs that we've had for Great Decisions, just remember we continue next Tuesday, once again at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum, and that will be the venue for the entire series. But we'll be joined by Dr. Bill Mosley, who's the president of the American Association of Geographers and also a professor of geography at Macalester College. He's going to be talking about decolonizing African agriculture. And then, if you want more, we will also be hosting the second of our Lunch and Learns, which is a daytime program meant to engage all of our community members in a discussion of the events that we are taking part of in Great Decisions. So that will be Thursday, February 26th, and we encourage you to sign up for that at worldmichigan.org. Thank you and have a great night.